to bring together some ideas about how we got here and what can we do about it. Where are we going from here? So, the point is we're all hitting a wall. This is the first generation where the children are not necessarily going to be, or in fact unlikely to be, better off than their parents. That's a very sobering thought. Who built this wall? Wall Street. They started with lies, and I'm going to describe each one of these which you cannot read here. Okay? Next. The corporate elites in this country set these lies in place, and we're going to talk about them, but let's identify who we're talking about here. There's the Wall Street group, of course, J. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, etc. The corporations that are big oil, big agriculture, big drug companies, insurance companies, telecom, etc., defense contractors. And then there are the lobbying groups. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce, Business Roundtable, etc. And also, you know, recently the Koch brothers have gotten very involved with various organizations and pouring literally hundreds of millions of dollars into political campaigns. Okay, here, what are the lies that we are being told? You'll recognize these because they're part of our current culture. Rich people know best. We should depend on trickle-down economics. Eliminating taxes and services. Notice they're labeled lies. I'm not promoting this. Eliminating taxes and services produces well-being in the population. Well, no, it doesn't. The fox fishing or the hen house. That as we've taken away rules on corporations and banks, we've allowed them to regulate themselves. Money is speech, and corporations have free speech rights just like people. Working together never pays off. You're on your own. No unions, no common efforts together. Then they influence the politicians to put these lies into rules. Go ahead. Again, you won't be able to read this, but I'm going to go over each one. Okay. Next. Money and politics. We had campaign finance laws that used to restrict the size of contributions to candidates. These laws were overturned by the courts as restrictions on free speech, which allowed unlimited amounts of funds to go into campaigns. The Supreme Court recently decided that corporations have the same rights to free speech as individual people do. Corporations are declared to be people, and these super rich individuals and corporations can now spend however much they wish to influence our elections. Taxes and budget rules changed. The taxes were shifted off the top 1% and off corporations and onto workers through payroll taxes. And then this drained the tax base, of course, and so they had an excuse to cut benefits and services to the population. The regulations that used to keep banks and investment companies from mingling their activities were overturned. They were gotten rid of, Glass-Steagall, in the Reagan administration, and that allowed banks to get too big to fail. I'll show you more about that in a minute. And also allowed them to engage in wild speculation. Congress allowed banks and corporations simply to write their own rules. And so taxpayers have assumed the risks involved. You all know the risks have been huge because we bailed them out. And they were allowed to get the profits, which I'll say more about in a minute. Now, you're not going to be able to read this in detail, but that's in 1995. That's not that long ago. We had that many banks. By 2007, I believe this is, we have essentially four banks. We have Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, and Citi. And they control all the banks, essentially all the banks in the country. Now that's what we mean by getting too big to fail. we've been taxing work more than wealth. In the last 30 years we're talking about, so that corporate taxes have gone down, capital gains taxes have gone down, estate taxes have decreased by 50%, and payroll taxes have gone up. So we're taxing work more than wealth. The minimum wage has been allowed to become unlivable. It cannot support a family of three, and we're not addressing that issue. We have defunded people's college dreams. Not only have state legislatures cut funding for public institutions, but we can't even get student loans to cover the cost of higher education. So the 1% has created extreme inequality. They have a history of doing this. Back in 1928, the 1% controlled 23.9% of the income. Then came the huge stock market crash, the Depression, World War II, and then we instituted good policy that kept income distribution from going solely to the top of the income ladder. And then we started to relax them, starting in the 1980s, and now the 1% controls 23.5% of the national income. What do you think is going to happen next? Okay. It used to be, between 1947, post-World War II, and 1979, everybody gained income. We all were moving together. Since 1979 to 2009, the top 90, the bottom 99% have hardly gained at all in that period. And here's the 1%. That's 1% gain. Okay? There are two books that I think I would recommend to you, and I'm just going to briefly say this. One is by Les Leopold, called The Looting of America. How Wall Street's game of fantasy finance, if I could read it myself, destroyed our jobs, pensions, and prosperity. And the next one is The Monster, How a Gang of Predatory Lenders and Wall Street Bankers fleeced America and spawned a global crisis. Okay, here's some of the data that you need to understand. The subprime mortgage scam. Deceptive lenders pressured marginal buyers into mortgages that have high fees for the lenders and bad terms for the borrowers. But these were marginal buyers, people who really couldn't afford to own a home. These subprime mortgages were sold to the nation's leading banks and investment brokers, that is, Citibank, Bank of America, Lehman Brothers, and so forth, which they put into packages to sell as investments. Okay? They made these subprime mortgages into investment packages that they pressured the rating agencies to call AAA investments. How they did this is it's really magic, because no one of these mortgages was anything but junk. But together somehow they were supposed to be AAA investments. This AAA rating made these subprime mortgages into investments for pension funds, school districts, and college endowments. Wait, there's worse to come. Next. You have to imagine really fantasy investments, where they made investments called synthetic collateralized debt obligations that were actually no one owned anything that was behind these. They were bets on whether other aspects, other properties would increase or decrease in value. But they were marketed as AAA rated investments. So, they were essentially fantasy finance, and Wall Street was acting like a casino. Wall Street brokers made billions in fees, and we'll talk more about this, selling these AAA-rated derivatives that were really fictions. Nobody owned anything behind them. Okay. So, the short story here, the subprime lending market collapsed. Wall Street pressured more and more lenders to make more and more risky loans just to get these derivatives, which were so profitable for them to sell. Mortgage lending simply collapsed in 2008 because the big companies, you know their names, Ameriquest, Countrywide, and there were hundreds of others, went belly up because their loans were based on inflated appraisals and often fraudulent buyer qualifications. These people couldn't pay, so that they were defaulting at a huge rate. Lehman Brothers evaporated because they owned so much of this fantasy finance. Merrill Lynch was absorbed into Bank of America. AIG and Citigroup were bailed out by the U.S. government because they were too big to fail. Right? Pension funds, school districts, college endowments literally lost trillions of dollars. In the Hudson book, there's a very poignant account of Wisconsin school districts who were talked into investing in these fictitious bonds or fictitious investments. Two of my children actually live in these districts, Waukesha and Whitefish Bay. And these school districts are they can't pay their teachers, they can't fix their buildings. They are millions of dollars in debt because they lost their shirts to Wall Street. Home prices collapsed. The price bubble burst when prices dropped from 2008 on. Many of you are aware of this. Millions of homes were foreclosed upon. Owners were evicted from the 2007 to present. Many more millions of homeowners owe mortgages that are larger than the value of their homes. They're underwater. Right? Taxpayers bailed out several Wall Street firms that had lost hundreds of billions of dollars in the housing market. What about homeowners? The super rich have gotten richer and richer through this whole period. In 2008, we saw the collapse of the stock market, the implosion of pension funds, 401ks, and college endowments, the destruction of millions of jobs, and the worst recession since the 1930s. However, at the same time, the top 25 hedge fund managers received $11.6 billion in compensation. That's an average, it's unbelievable, but this is true. They got an average of $464 million each. Here's the problem. We no longer reap the rewards of our labor. Up until the 1970s, the increases in productivity, which is this line, went right along with the increases in income. I should say the other way. And increases in income went along with increases in productivity. But starting in the 1970s, family income rose a bit. But productivity, meanwhile, went way up. But that money, the benefit of this productivity did not go to the workers. Here's the wage gap as a ratio of the top 100 CEOs to average workers' pay. Let me just point out to you, this is very dramatic. In 1970, the ratio of the top 100 CEOs' pay was 45 to 1 to their workers. That's 1970. By 1980, it was 127 to 1. By 1990, it was 321 to 1. But look, by 2000, it's up to 1,510 to 1. And it's going up. This is where the financial sector took over from the manufacturing sector. The financial sector became the majority of our economy at that time. Okay? I want you to understand this because it's really hard to imagine this is true, but this is true. This is from 2000. This is the ratio of all CEOs, all CEOs' income to their average workers' wages by country. Over here, and these are our developed neighbors and friends, our APAC friends and our European friends. In Japan, the ratio of CEOs' pay to workers is 10 to 1. In Germany, it's 11. In Sweden, it's 14 to 1. France is about, I forgot, 18 to 1, something like that. And you get up to Britain, it's about 20 to 1. Okay? In the worst case of a developed country, South Africa, it's 51 to 1. In the United States, it's 500 to 1. Can you ask yourself if something's wrong with this picture? Are we out of step with the rest of the world? We're ripped off. So this is Leopold's book, that I pointed out earlier. Because the productivity bonus did not go to the workers, the income gushed to the top 1%. Then they used their cash to gamble on financial markets, not to invest in the U.S. economy. This is mine. This is not what attributed to Leopold, but when you hear politicians say we should not tax the rich because they are the job creators, I really want you to laugh. They're not. So here we are. The housing bubble burst. The entire fantasy finance world collapsed. Investors and bankers all over the globe are loaded with toxic derivatives that crash in value. The banking system froze. The stock market crashed. The global economy tanked. And we're still seeing this, right? We're living through this global economy shakeout. So here we are, almost broke, homeless, with no pensions, being told we have to tighten our belts. Again, what is wrong with this picture? These are Wall Street's results. They did this to us, okay? The results of the last 30 years are we have a smaller, more fragile middle class. Here's the evidence. I mean, 1 in 3 working families is low income. Wages that are paid to the middle income groups have hardly increased in 30 years. We've been through 4 million home foreclosures. 28 million people can't find any or enough work. The middle class declines as union membership declines. Some of you might not like this graph, but union membership is high. The middle class percentage of the population is high. Household debt as a percentage of disposable income has gone from, well, right after World War II, 1949, 33%, yeah, up to today 141% of household disposable income. People are drowning in debt. A percentage of families whose savings would run out in 3 months or less. White families is about 38%. Latino and African American families much higher. These are people who would not be able to eat in 3 months, okay? So, the thing is that every time that 1% get really greedy, as they have, they also crash the economy, and every time they purchase themselves more power, we lose our voices. There's a nice quote here which I'll just read you. Justice Brandeis said, "We may have democracy, or we may have wealth concentration in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both." And Robert Reich over here says, in 2007, the top 1% took 23.5% of all income. Not since 1928 was there such a concentration, and before that, 1888, which was another big crash. Okay? So, what we want to do is say, what can we do about this? So, 131,000 people participated in the American Dream contract activity online, and another 300,000 people have endorsed this. Let me just talk to you about the 10 points. So, I'll do them one at a time. Next. Okay, the first thing is, one is invest in our infrastructure. This is what we need to do, okay? Roads and bridges. I mean, broadband access. You can add to this list. I mean, invest in our infrastructure. Dash